Our next speaker, Jackie Boucher. Jackie has a passion. She is the human nutrition and children's I don't know what her role is here, but she works in human nutrition at Children's Heartlink. Jackie has a passion for improving lives and has spent her entire career in healthcare with a special focus on population health. She was named president of Children's Heartlink in 2015. She previously held leadership positions at the Minneapolis Heart Institute Foundation, where she was chief operating officer and institutional officer for research, and led its Hearts Beat Back program, and at Health Partners, the largest consumer-governed nonprofit healthcare organization in the U.S. She's a registered dietitian. Jackie has served on the American Diabetes Association Board of Directors. She has served as editor-in-chief of Diabetes Spectrum and received the Outstanding Educator in Diabetes Award from the ADA in 2018. Jackie has an MS in nutrition from the University of Minnesota and a BS in dietetics from the College of St. Benedict. Let's welcome Jackie Boucher.
Thank you so much. It always sounds better than you are, right? Well, I want to thank you so much for joining today. And I know nutrition is a topic that you probably have a lot of questions about. I always start with the disclosure that my only conflict is I grew up on a sugar beet farm. And we also grew wheat, barley, and flax. And so I'm here today in part due to sugar. But Hippocrates said it right, that your diet should be your first medicine. I think nutrition, even though it's been around and we've eaten food our entire lives as human beings, it's still relatively new as a science in some ways, because when you think about 100 or more years ago, we studied a lot around deficiencies, right? Like rickets and scurvy from lack of vitamin C and those types of diseases. And now we're trying to think about it more in a preventive way of how can we eat. And it's less about nutrients because we eat foods which often have many nutrients and other phytochemicals. And so it's a complex science. And so that's why I think sometimes it's hard, because you hear on the news one day at one study and the next day another study, and it gets confusing. And I think it's because it is so complex and people's bodies are complex and how we each react to different food. And so I think recommendations have changed over time. One of the things we do know, and that has been more studied, is that poor diet quality, so the lack of quality foods that we eat, is one of the leading risks for mortality, so for death. And so nutrition is responsible for more than 50% of deaths worldwide. And when you look at these risk factors on the left, and this is probably the most complex slide I will have, but nutrition is important in many of the other risk factors listed there. So you see high blood pressure, high cholesterol, high glucose, many of these different things nutrition has an impact on those different disease states. And so it is really one of the most important lifestyle factors that we need to focus on to improve our health. So as I mentioned, nutrition's changed over time. In the 70s, the USDA food guidelines really focused on a food pyramid, and you can see at the bottom is many grains, and at the top is, sweets, which maybe some things have not changed as much related to sweets, but then also fats. And as we know over time, if you're choosing high quality fats, maybe those don't need to belong as much at the top of the pyramid. In 2010, they tried to simplify the messaging around nutrition and put it in perspective of a plate, where half your plate should be fruit and vegetables. The fourth is grains, so it's no longer the big base at the bottom. And then a fourth is really your protein source. Now in 2021, it's changed again, and it's a little bit different in the sense that we know fats maybe aren't as bad as we thought they were, that proteins we want to choose very low fat or lean types of meats, and we want to expand what we think of as the carbohydrates and the grains, thinking about legumes. There's also a lot more evidence around nuts and seeds. And so really changing that over time. I think the other piece that's tying into some of the recommendations is, what's good in terms of agriculture and sustainability and how we try to grow foods in a sustainable way that is helpful to the planet, right? And so how can we think about eating also in the context of our planet and how we can improve it? And so it continues to focus on plants. So you can see that's a large portion, but we also try to think about plant oils, the right kind, the unsaturated plant oils, limiting our sugar, and I'll talk more about all these in a minute. The importance of plant-sourced protein, so like nuts and legumes, for example, or lentils have some protein in them, and animal protein, lower fat dairy foods, and then really thinking about grains as an even smaller portion than you might have seen on the food pyramid in the early 2010. So dietary patterns continue to evolve and change, and it's very important to think about it. What are those things that we want to emphasize? Because as much as the message, all foods can fit, which I truly believe they can, we want to eat substantially a certain, if 90% of the time we're eating fairly healthy foods, the other 10% we're eating some of those other foods that all foods can fit. So really the emphasis has changed a lot when we think about the quality to more fruits and vegetables and thinking about the variety of colors of fruits and vegetables that you eat. And I think you saw Dr. Saxana said like 7 or more servings a day. Whole grain foods. Again, the healthy sources of proteins, fish and nuts, and then thinking about liquid plant oils, so like soybean oil, canola oil, olive oil, those types of oils. We want to watch our calorie intakes, so even when we eat healthy foods, like things, especially plant oils or like nuts and seeds, calories can add up quickly over time, so thinking about that. And then really minimizing those foods that maybe don't contribute nutritionally as much as other foods, like beverages. Juices can be helpful in terms of nutrients, but obviously not too much, especially if they have added sugars to the juices. Thinking about our protein sources, are they very processed? Even some of the newer plant protein sources, you want to make sure, because those can have sugar and salt and other processed fillers. So thinking about those and limiting those in part of your processed meats, trying to avoid salt, moderate alcohol intake, and then some of the tropical oils. So I'll talk more about these as we go through this. I think when we look at the National Lipid Association guidelines, and I want to just put all these up here now. Again, we want to choose a food pattern where there's a significant amount of plant choices within that eating pattern, focusing on weight loss. And so in this study and the recommendations from the National Lipid Association, they're really comparing diet to taking like a statin medication. And so these percentages where you say focusing on weight loss, if you can lose 5 to 10% of weight, if you have a high cholesterol level, you can lower your cholesterol by 3 to 5%. If you reduce your saturated fat intake from meats or the solid fats like lard or shortening, or even some types of margarine or butter has saturated fat, and limiting our cholesterol and avoiding trans fat in foods, again, that processed fat in like baked goods or other processed foods, you can lower your cholesterol by 5 to 10%. And then choosing foods high in soluble fiber or plant stanols, so just eating more foods with plant-based diet with phytochemicals in the different plants that we eat, you can lower it 4 to 10%. So with diet alone, compared to also like a statin, you can reduce your cholesterol levels by 10 to 25% just by eating healthy, making healthy, high-quality food choices. So what is soluble fiber? Soluble fiber is found in many foods. It's more of, again, as in the previous slide, a viscous type fiber that's in those foods. And why eat soluble fiber? Because it can lower your cholesterol, it can lower your blood glucose if you have pre-diabetes or diabetes, and it can also make you feel fuller when you choose fruits and vegetables high in soluble fiber. And these are just some examples of different foods and how much soluble fiber in those foods. And when you look at those, again, most of those are, whole foods, right? It's not the processed foods where you're going to find as much soluble fiber. As Dr. Saxana mentioned, hypertension is a risk factor for cardiovascular disease, and one that we tend to focus on, and that nutrition can have a significant impact. So if you have high blood pressure, making some small changes can actually have a big difference in your blood pressure level. And so if you use the 2-to-1 goal with weight loss, so even a 2-pound weight loss, could bring your blood pressure down by 1 millimeter. And so I think, or by 5 milliliters HG. So just thinking about a 2-pound weight loss can have a significant impact on your blood pressure. Following the DASH eating style, so DASH stands for Dietary Approaches to Stop Hypertension. And what this diet is a diet very similar to the recommendations I'm talking about. It's very focused on fruits and vegetables, whole grains, legumes and nuts, low-fat dairy, lean protein. And this diet is one that can help you lower your blood pressure. And it also involves eating less sodium or lower sodium foods, so less processed foods. And so that can lower your blood pressure by 11 points. Reducing sodium, so it's not saying eliminate it, but just by cutting out 1,000 milligrams a day, thinking about like a teaspoon of salt is 3,500 milligrams of sodium. So just even reducing that by even a half a teaspoon, right, of salt a day can lower your blood pressure. And then increasing potassium, so choosing more like green leafy vegetables, things like bananas, avocados, beets. There's many fruits and vegetables, even dairy has potassium, can help you lower your blood pressure level. Sugar is another one that I think over time the recommendations have changed. And the recommendation is to eat less than 10% of your calories from sugar, in part because sugar has no nutritional value, right? It has calories, but no nutritional value. When we look at this, about 50% of sugar intake for most people comes from beverages or sweets, and another 30% from sweets and snacks. So those are really the two major groups where we're going to get sugar in our diet. And so when we look at this, less than 10% of calories from added sugars, depending on the calorie level you're following, ranging from 1,600 to 2,400 calories, it's about 40 to 60 grams of sugar. And, as it says there, 1 teaspoon of sugar is 4 grams, which is 16 calories. So I think as we age, also our metabolism slows down, and as we're trying to manage our weight, cutting back on sugar is one way to reduce calories, and it doesn't affect sort of the nutrients that you're eating because it really doesn't have any nutrients. So just how plant-based should you go? I think many people ask, so do I have to eat vegan or vegetarian? Vegan is no animal products, and like vegetarian often can include, some people would include, depending on the type of vegetarian, fish or dairy or eggs. But when this study, which I think is really interesting because they followed people for over 16 years, so prospective means following it over time, and just replacing like 3% of your total calories from animal protein with plant protein can reduce your cardiovascular mortality, so death from heart disease, by 11 to 12%. And so if we translated that into just a daily basis, what does that mean? Even if you just said, and you might have heard in the media sometimes like a meatless Monday, just 1 day a week. That's all 3%. If you just changed 1 day a week and ate more of a vegetarian type diet, you could reduce your cardiovascular mortality by 11 to 12%. So it doesn't have to be a big change. I think that's the great part about nutrition, is small changes can make a big difference. So again, like most recommendations, plant-based food is very important because they have so many different, even phytochemicals that we're still trying to study that can improve your health, in addition to the soluble fiber and many of the vitamins and minerals that your body needs on a daily basis. So it's really about eating whole foods and thinking about the quality of the food choices we make on a daily basis. I think eating more nuts, legumes, and fish is very important to cardiovascular health specifically. And so I think nuts and legumes can be a protein source on those meatless Mondays. So like, I know I like lentil chili, for example, which is very hearty and has a lot of protein. And I feel very full even after a cup of that. Eating fish a few times a week to get those omega-3 fatty acids and monounsaturated fatty acids. Low-fat dairy, and again, like eating less high-fat and meats or processed meats. Nuts and coronary heart disease, I think many used to think nuts were something we should avoid. I think they can contribute calories. When you think like a cup of peanuts might be 900 calories, it can add up if you're trying to manage your weight, but they do have a health benefit associated with them. Even just a small amount each day of a handful. Like I like to throw a few nuts in oatmeal or yogurt or something like that just to give it a little extra something. And knowing your nuts, you know, I think when you think about the Mediterranean diet and what they probably ate more pistachios. I think there's been a lot more studies around almonds and walnuts. But just understanding like it's a handful, it's a small amount that's really necessary to achieve that health benefit. In terms of healthy fats, you know, omega-3 fatty acids, you might have heard some about those, and especially if you have a high triglyceride level, your doctor may talk with you about a supplement. But you can get good sources of omega-3 fatty acids from foods, so things like salmon, tuna, trout, or herring. So eating, again, some type of fish 2 times a week can be beneficial to heart disease, or flaxseed oil, if you don't like fish, is another good source of omega-3 fatty acids. Monounsaturated fats is the type of fat that we often hear a lot about in the Mediterranean diet because of olive oil, which I think is a very common source of that, but also peanut and canola oil are good sources of monounsaturated fat as well. We can also eat avocados. I think we've seen really the popularity of avocados growing, the avocado toast on menus or other things. Avocado is a great source of monounsaturated fatty acid in addition to the nuts and seeds. Polyunsaturated fats, again, in the mono and the polyunsaturated fats, it goes back to liquid plant sources, like really trying to focus on using more oils when you're cooking or in salad dressings or things like that, which is the more beneficial type of fat that you want to include in your diet. It's not to say that we shouldn't eat margarine, for example, as long as you choose one that has a liquid oil as the first ingredient, or butter. I think butter can be included within a healthy eating plan. I know I like butter too. Just again, it's small amounts of that because it does have some saturated fat. I think with eggs, the research has really evolved over time. I think we used to really think that we couldn't eat eggs at all, and then it kind of went exactly to the other extreme, where I think people felt like, oh, I can eat as many eggs as I want. If your doctor says you have like familial hypercholesterolemia, so more of a genetic predisposition to that, probably you're not going to eat a lot of eggs because your body's not going to process the cholesterol as well. But for most people, recent research shows that 1 whole egg a day does not really increase your cardiovascular risk, and so there's a little bit less concern about eggs in the diet. Alcohol. I think alcohol is one of those that sometimes you hear it's good for me, it's not good for me. And the challenge with that is maybe some types of alcohol, like red wine. You probably hear about red wine, it being good for heart disease. And at the same time, we know alcohol can also increase and predispose risk to cancer or other diseases. And so that's why, I think there are some health benefits that have been shown related to cardiovascular disease with certain types of alcohol. But we say do it in moderation. And if you don't drink, don't start just to get the health benefit. It also has calories and other. But if you do drink, there can be moderate health benefits of 1 drink a day for women or 2 drinks for men. So really it's about moderation. And I think that's true with a lot of the foods that, if we want to have special foods like cake, like I know celebrated my daughter's birthday this week and had cake. And I think those foods can all fit. It's just about thinking about the total diet and how often you have certain foods and trying to focus on most of the day having high quality food choices. So in terms of the recommendations, I think, often the American College of Cardiology, the American Heart Association, the American Diabetes Association, the USDA nutrition guidelines, everyone has different nutrition recommendations. But when we look across all of the recommendations, they have a lot of similarities. They want you to choose those high quality food choices, so more fruits and vegetables, getting more soluble fiber and fiber, eating less processed foods or sugar. Really focus on choosing high quality fats. That fats aren't really as taboo as we used to think. When we had those low fat diets, people were getting a lot more sugar and processed food. And that's not what we want. We want you to choose high quality fats, and you can include them in your eating plan along with nuts and seeds. And that really any food pattern can fit. I know with the plethora, especially if you're following a weight management type eating plan, many might think, well, what about low carb, or what about some of those other diets? I think, again, it's about sustainability, choosing an eating plan that you can live and eat the rest of your life. I think it's about, again, within that eating plan, trying to limit the processed food and making sure that you're getting adequate fruits and vegetables and good sources of fat and lean protein. And so any eating plan can work as long as you really focus on the quality of the food choices, think about your portion control to try to manage your weight, keep your sodium lower, and choosing really those high quality fats.